How many times have you sought quick relief, a video, some food, something sweet, a drink, just to feel better, and ended up feeling worse afterward? It's strange, isn't it? It seems that the more we try to fill ourselves, the emptier we become. Pleasure, which should be synonymous with life, has become a kind of sophisticated anesthesia we call good moments. What, in truth, only postpones discomfort. We scroll the screen, open the fridge, make plans, all to avoid facing the unease that insists on returning once the effect wears off. We live surrounded by stimuli, yet increasingly distant from ourselves. It's as if we're always too busy to notice what truly hurts. The rush has become an elegant disguise for a tired soul. The mind asks for relief, the body obeys, and the emptiness remains, waiting for the next excuse to be forgotten. And when we finally stop, we realize we're not exhausted by the world. We're exhausted from running away. It was in trying to understand this endless search that three thinkers reached interconnected conclusions. Carl Gustav Jung saw pleasure as a way to hide what we don't want to feel. Erich Fromm believed we flee from freedom because it forces us to face what exists within us. And Gabor Maté observed that no one is addicted to pleasure itself, but to the relief it brings from the pain we try to deny. Three perspectives that, together, reveal the same point. What we try to numb is precisely what most needs to be understood. This video is about that. The pleasure that numbs, the exhaustion of those who feel too much, and the courage to stop running away, because perhaps the problem was never feeling pain, but believing the only way out is trying not to feel anything at all. There's something curious about the way human beings pursue pleasure. At first glance, it seems like a simple, legitimate desire to feel good. But when we look closer, pleasure reveals itself as a direct manifestation of our inner voids. Jung said that everything we deny within ourselves finds a way to return, and often returns disguised as desire. That's why pleasure can become an unconscious replica of what we're trying to hide: fear, loneliness, insecurity, drugs, medication, pornography, food, work. Anything can become shelter when the soul can't find rest, and the body, which only wanted lightness, ends up learning to survive on short doses of relief. These impulses don't arise from weakness. They're desperate attempts to maintain balance amid inner chaos. Jung observed that pleasure, when repetitive, is a form of compensation, an automatic motion of someone trying to silence the discomfort growing within. That's why people live constantly busy, always connected, always stimulated, as if stillness were dangerous. Pleasure, in this context, is a quick remedy, not a celebration, and the more it's used to cover the emptiness, the more the emptiness demands new doses. Dopamine promises relief, but delivers demand. A simple example: think of someone who jumps from relationship to relationship. Sometimes they're not seeking love. They're seeking to be filled. Affection becomes anesthesia, romance, a hiding place. The same happens with those who chase success at any cost. The perfect body, the perfect car, the perfect house, the perfect person, the next perfect pleasure. Everything seems driven by ambition, but it's merely an attempt to escape the feeling of inadequacy. And the more one chases ideal pleasure, the farther one gets from real peace. The curious thing is, no one does this out of malice. People are just trying to survive with the tools they have. When inner pain becomes unbearable and there's no room to feel it, pleasure becomes the only language left. Gabor Maté used to say that no one is addicted to pleasure itself, but to the relief it brings. And that's what makes someone return, even knowing they'll regret it afterward. Pleasure is the interval between pain and the memory of it. And that's why it's so addictive. It doesn't heal, but it suspends discomfort for a moment. But that moment comes at a cost. The pleasure that begins as refuge ends as a prison. Slowly, the body adapts. The mind demands more, and the heart remains hungry. And it's precisely there that the question few dare to ask arises: is the problem in pleasure itself, or in what we're trying to hide behind it? Freedom seems like the greatest of human desires, but in practice, few know how to handle the weight it carries. Fromm reflected that freedom, for many, is frightening, because it forces us to face what's inside, and we don't always like what we find. Thus, pleasure comes into play as an elegant disguise to avoid confronting one's own emptiness. It's easier to follow the rhythm of distractions than to face the inner space that reveals what's truly missing. So people fill their time with movement, stimulation, and excess, not because they love the rush, but because they fear what happens when it stops. The modern mind has grown accustomed to fleeing from itself. It works late, replies to messages non-stop, engages in useless debates, gets lost in notifications. All of this just to avoid dealing with the uncomfortable feeling of being alone with oneself. Fromm observed that freedom demands responsibility, and responsibility demands lucidity. And it's precisely that lucidity that feels heavy, because seeing oneself means realizing that much of what we do doesn't come from desire, but from fear. The fear of not being loved, not being seen, not having worth. So we become prisoners of an internal system that confuses pleasure with autonomy. There's something deeply ironic in this. The more people seek freedom, the more they imprison themselves in small escapes: the cigarette to relax, the drink to socialize, the phone to distract. Each act is an attempt to control the discomfort of existing. Fromm often said that fleeing from freedom is the most subtle form of modern slavery. And this slavery doesn't come from outside. It's born within the mind when we trade the courage to feel for the convenience of staying busy. Pleasure, in this case, is not a choice. It's an escape, disguised as independence. And perhaps that's why the information age is also the age of anxiety. We live surrounded by everything that promises freedom: travel, technology, endless possibilities. But paradoxically, we've never been so trapped by our own need for relief. Dopamine has become the new invisible chain. We're not connected, we're captive. Freedom, in its purest form, is the encounter with oneself, without distractions. But that clarity is frightening. It's as if the soul, unaccustomed to peace, begged for stimulation, just to avoid feeling. The problem is that the more we flee from freedom, the more the emptiness grows. And the greater the emptiness, the more we need pleasure to hide it. It's a vicious circle where relief becomes routine and inner calm becomes a foreign land. The mind believes that resting is the same as being lost, but in truth, it's in the pause that the essential is revealed. And perhaps what most frightens the human being isn't pain itself, but what it might reveal, a truth that, until now, they've preferred to postpone. Gabor Maté observed that no one is truly addicted to pleasure. What traps people is the relief it offers for a few moments. Dopamine deceives. It promises reward, but delivers only its anticipation. Thus, Each impulse becomes a small contract, with forgetfulness. A click, a sip, a purchase, a swipe, all to avoid the discomfort that insists on returning. When the effect fades, pleasure works like an emotional patch. It covers the tear, but doesn't mend it. And the more we try to relieve pain, the more sensitive we become to it. The mind's logic is simple. If something reduces suffering, then it must be good. But the brain associates repetition with survival. It learns that every stimulus that soothes discomfort must be sought again and again. One sweet becomes two. One drink becomes a routine. One video becomes an addiction. And almost imperceptibly, the person begins to revolve around the next relief. It's what Maté called a survival mechanism that turns into a prison. At that point, pleasure stops being a choice. It becomes compulsion, and the more frequent it is, the less effective it becomes. The feeling of emptiness soon returns, more intense, asking for new doses. It's like trying to warm yourself with a short blanket. You pull one side and uncover the other. This dynamic is present in all addictions: drugs, medication, pornography, social media. Each promises an escape, but delivers only another path. Back to the starting point. Pleasure becomes an imperfect copy of what's truly missing: connection, rest, meaning. That's why relief is always fleeting. And the more fleeting it is, the more addictive it becomes. But no one becomes captive to this out of weakness. It's a natural instinct of self-protection. When the emotional self finds no comfort, the body tries to cope the only way it can. It's like a silent cry for help, expressed through automatic actions. Gabor Maté often said that every addiction begins as an attempt to heal, and he was right. No one seeks pleasure because they want to destroy themselves. They seek it because they want to stop suffering. And that's the modern tragedy, confusing healing with distraction and relief with freedom. The problem is that relief doesn't sustain, it only postpones. And with each return, the emptiness feels a bit deeper, as if something essential were being traded for fragments of euphoria. It's at that moment that the human being begins to realize that pleasure has stopped being a companion and has become a demanding master. And the inevitable question arises: what would happen if, instead of seeking the next relief, one finally faced what causes the pain? Most people aren't afraid of pain. They're afraid of stopping. Stopping is like opening a door to a place where everything postponed still beats, asking for attention. Old thoughts, unfinished feelings, memories that still burn. That's why many keep life in constant motion. The rush becomes a sophisticated disguise for inner discomfort. That's why so many say they can't sit still. It's not impatience, it's fear of what may surface when distractions cease. Free time reveals truths that daily life disguises. Jung said that the unconscious doesn't disappear just because we ignore it. It simply changes form. And what we call boredom is, in fact, the beginning of contact with something deeper. The mind, accustomed to continuous stimulation, it doesn't know what to do with the open territory of stillness. It tries to fill the space with tasks, sounds, conversations, anything to keep itself busy and distracted from itself. But it's in that interval that consciousness begins to reorganize. Pause, then, is not the absence of life. It's the ground where life rebuilds itself. The problem is that we've learned to associate pause with unproductiveness. Stopping has become synonymous with wasting time. And so, humanity remains exhausted, confusing movement with meaning. The phone replaces introspection, the schedule replaces breathing, and stimulation replaces inner listening. It's a cruel paradox. The more we fill ourselves with tasks, the emptier we feel. Fromm already warned that true freedom doesn't lie in doing what you want, but in enduring what you feel when there's nothing to distract you. Some try to fill that space with hurried spirituality, meditation as an obligation, self-care as a checklist. But the soul doesn't heal with quick formulas. It needs real space, not more stimulation. It's in stillness that the signs hidden by haste begin to appear. When the mind slows down, it starts revealing what truly hurts, and that's frightening. But it's in that moment of vulnerability that something precious is born. The possibility of reconciliation with oneself. Pause is the interval between who we were and who we can still become. That's why so many fear stopping, because pause isn't emptiness. It's an encounter with what's most genuine within us. And it's there, when the disguises fall, that we realize how much pleasure has served as distraction rather than celebration. Perhaps true courage isn't in continuing to move, but in learning to remain whole, even when there's no movement at all. And it's precisely at that point that the next choice arises: to seek pleasure to escape, or to seek peace to understand. There is a striking difference between relieving pain and healing it. Pleasure, most of the time, takes pain off stage. Peace, on the other hand, teaches you to move through it. While pleasure promises immediate relief, peace asks for surrender. Pleasure is a flash. Peace, a state that grows slowly. That's why, so often, we prefer what is quick, even if it costs us dearly later. The human mind has grown used to trading comfort for urgency. It wants everything now, even if the now lasts nothing. The problem is that pleasure without awareness is like fire on paper. It warms for a moment and quickly turns to ash. Peace is different. It doesn't promise excitement, but depth. It doesn't arrive with euphoria. It arrives with clarity. It's like taking a deep breath after living on autopilot for too long. It isn't found in ready-made formulas or miraculous promises. Sometimes it's in simple actions, a true conversation, a meal without distractions, a moment when you do something purely out of love. These are small gestures that give life back its depth. Pleasure is movement, peace is direction, and when the two align, true well-being is born. But there's a common mistake. Many believe that to have peace, one must eliminate pleasure. That's not true. The problem isn't pleasure itself, but using it as an escape. A morning coffee, good music, a touch of affection, all of this can be pleasure and still be a path to peace. The difference lies in the effect it leaves. True pleasure expands. Escapist pleasure exhausts. One brings lightness. The other demands a hangover. Awareness is what separates what heals from what merely disguises. Pleasure, when lived consciously, stops being anesthesia and becomes celebration again. It's the joy of existing without needing to escape from anything. Jung reminded us that integration is true balance, and to integrate is to allow pleasure and peace to coexist. It's not about punishing yourself for desiring, but about noticing what you desire and why. Peace doesn't demand abstinence. It demands discernment. It's knowing when pleasure is an invitation to live, and when it's merely a distraction, disguised as freedom. Perhaps the secret lies precisely in this: to stop seeking experiences, that make you forget life, and start seeking those that make you feel it. Because soulless pleasure exhausts, but peace nourishes. And when one learns to choose what makes the heart lighter, the world around stops being a field of escape and becomes a space of encounter. And it's from that place, that gentle lucidity, that the question arises to prepare the next step. If pleasure can deceive, how can we learn to transform pain into something that truly liberates? Healing doesn't begin when the pain goes away, but when we stop treating it as an enemy. Escaping is instinctive. Every human does it. When something inside becomes too tight, there's no use in moving somewhere else. If the problem is within you, it goes with you. But maturing means understanding that running away doesn't solve. It only delays. The first step is simple, yet powerful. Notice the impulse. Before reaching for your phone, opening the fridge, or seeking any distraction, breathe and ask yourself what you're truly feeling. Naming the emotion is like turning on a light in a dark room. What once seemed frightening begins to take shape and meaning. The second step is to redirect. Instead of reacting automatically, consciously choose a new action. It could be going for a walk, taking a long shower, writing down what you feel, or simply looking out the window and observing what's out there. These small changes en route break the cycle of repetition. It's like teaching the brain to find new paths to relief that don't demand guilt afterward. Over time, the mind learns that true comfort doesn't come from excess, but from coherence. The third step is to welcome. When sadness comes, don't run. Sit with it. When anger arrives, listen to what it's trying to say. Emotions don't appear to punish us, but to teach us. Gabor Maté reminded us that emotional pain is the body asking to be heard. And, as contradictory as it may seem, the more space we give to that discomfort, the faster it transforms. It's like letting stagnant water flow. What was murky begins to clear when it can move freely. Trading escape for wholeness doesn't mean becoming zen or perfect. It simply means stopping, the act of abandoning yourself. It's being whole in the small things, in a conversation, a gesture, a moment of rest. It's understanding that true balance isn't about eliminating discomfort, but about not getting lost within it. Jung said that consciousness is born from the meeting of light and shadow, and it's in that mixture that life becomes real. To flee is to live halfway. To embrace is to live meaningfully. In the end, there's no secret formula, only the willingness to truly see yourself. And that seeing isn't mystical. It's everyday, simple, human. It's choosing to be whole instead of numb. And when that happens, something changes. Pleasure stops being an escape and becomes celebration. Pain stops being punishment and becomes guidance. It's at that point that relief becomes learning, and living finally stops being survival and returns to being experience. In the end, pleasure isn't the enemy. Forgetfulness is. The problem, it was never wanting to feel good, but not knowing what to do with what hurts. Running away seems easier until the day the escape itself becomes exhausting, and that's when something changes. When you realize that maybe healing isn't in running, but in stopping and listening to what the pain is trying to say. Because every pain has a message, every repetition has an origin, and pleasure, when used with awareness, can return to what it always was. A celebration, not a hiding place. Peace isn't in eliminating what bothers you, but in learning to be whole, even when life challenges you. Now tell me, how many times have you tried to fill yourself with everything, just to feel alive? How many times have you promised to change, only to end up back on the same path? Maybe this is the moment to do things differently. Not to blame yourself, but to start understanding, respecting, and loving yourself. If this video touched you in any way, you'll find in the comments materials that go deeper into the themes discussed here about the mind, pain, pleasure, and self-knowledge. And before you go, like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so we can keep learning, you and I, together.